attorney looked me dead in the eye and said, "Gloria, if you sign that paper, I cannot help you anymore." I picked up the pen anyway, and I smiled. Everyone in that conference room thought I had lost my mind. Maybe they were right. I was 68 years old, sitting across from a man I had loved for 41 years, watching him barely look at me while his lawyer slid a settlement agreement across the table. The agreement that gave him everything: the house, the rental properties, the retirement accounts we'd built together since 1983. All of it. I signed every page. What nobody in that room knew, what I hadn't told a single soul except my daughter, was that 3 weeks earlier I had already won. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually started, because none of what happened at the end makes sense without understanding what happened at the beginning. My husband and I met at a church picnic in Dayton, Ohio, in the summer of 1981. I was 27. He was 30. He brought potato salad and forgot the serving spoon and borrowed mine, and somehow that turned into 41 years of marriage. We weren't rich people. We were just two people who worked hard and didn't spend foolishly. He managed inventory at a manufacturing company, and I taught third grade for 33 years. We bought a small house in 1986, paid it off in 2001, then used the equity to purchase 2 rental properties on the east side of town. Nothing glamorous, modest 2 bedrooms that we rented to working families. We maintained them ourselves as long as we could, and when we couldn't, we hired a property manager. By the time I retired at 62, we had a decent life. Not wealthy, but comfortable. Our retirement accounts combined were just over $400,000. We had the house, the 2 rentals, and a small savings account I called the Rainy Day Fund. About $42,000 that I kept in a separate account I'd opened on my own years before. Just a habit my mother had taught me. She always said a woman should have something in her own name. I never told him about that account, not because I was hiding it, but because it was mine before we married, and I just kept it that way. He never asked. Our children, we have 2, a son who lives in Seattle and a daughter here in Ohio, grew up watching us make decisions together, talk through problems at the kitchen table, pay bills on the 1st of every month without drama. I thought we had built something solid. I thought we were the kind of couple other people looked at and took comfort in. If they can make it, there's hope for the rest of us. I was wrong about a lot of things. I found out about her the way a lot of women find out about these things. A phone left unlocked on the kitchen counter, a name that came up too many times in too short a span. I wasn't snooping. I was turning off the alarm he'd forgotten to cancel when he ran back upstairs, and the screen lit up, and there it was. A message that nobody sends to a friend. Her name was Amber. She was 34. I set the phone back down exactly where I found it. I went and sat at the kitchen table and looked out the window at the backyard, at the garden I'd spent 15 years building, and I felt something go very quiet inside me. Not numb, just quiet, like the moment before you understand something fully, when you know something is true but the weight of it hasn't landed yet. He came downstairs, grabbed his phone, kissed the top of my head like he'd done 10,000 times, and left for what he said was a Saturday morning golf game. I sat there for a long time. Then I called my daughter. She didn't say much at first. She listened. Then she said, "Mom, before you say anything to him, I want you to call someone." She had a name. A friend of a friend, a woman who'd been through a difficult divorce and had a good attorney. She gave me the number. I wasn't sure I wanted a divorce. I want to be honest about that. 41 years is not nothing. You don't make a decision like that sitting at a kitchen table on a Saturday morning. But I made the call because my daughter asked me to, and because something in me understood even then that I needed to know what I was dealing with before I said a word to him. The attorney's name was Richard, and before I go further I want to say that I was skeptical walking in. I'm a 67-year-old retired school teacher from Dayton. I don't have experience with lawyers beyond signing the deed on our house. But he sat down across from me, and he didn't talk to me like I was fragile or confused. He talked to me like a person who needed information and was capable of understanding it. The first thing he asked was not, "What did your husband do?" It was, "What do you know about your finances?" I knew more than some wives in my situation, probably less than I should have. I knew our retirement accounts, our mortgage payoff date, the rental income, the property tax amounts. I had always done the household books. That was my job in our marriage, tracking monthly expenses, keeping the files organized. He handled the bigger financial decisions, the investments, the rental agreements. I trusted him. I signed things he put in front of me. Richard asked me to pull together everything I could find. Tax returns for the last 5 years, bank statements, the rental agreements, the property records from the county auditor's office, which he told me were public and I could access online. I spent the following 2 weeks doing exactly that, and what I found sitting at my dining room table, going through 5 years of documents I had signed without reading closely, made my stomach drop. The second rental property, the one on Elmwood, had been refinanced in 2019. I remembered signing papers. I remembered him telling me we were getting a better rate. What I had not understood was that we had taken out $60,000 in cash during that refinance. I didn't know where that money had gone. It was not in any account I could find. Our retirement accounts were lower than I expected, with a series of withdrawals between 2020 and 22 totaling nearly $70,000 that I had no knowledge of. Richard said, "This is a pattern I've seen before." He was not dramatic about it. He just said it plainly. "We need a forensic accountant before anything else happens." I hadn't confronted my husband yet. I want to explain why. Richard advised me not to. He said that the moment I showed my hand, behavior often changed. Accounts got moved. Assets got repositioned. Documentation got harder to trace. I needed to let things stay exactly where they were while we figured out the full picture. He said to act normal, so I did. I made dinner. I watched television beside him on the couch. I asked about his week. I watched him text on his phone with the screen tilted away from me, and I said nothing. I went to book club on Thursday nights and cried in my car in the parking lot of the library, before driving home with a normal expression on my face. My daughter knew. That was the only person. The forensic accountant, a woman named, well, I'll just say she was thorough, spent 3 weeks going through everything. What she found was not complicated, but it was deliberate. Over 4 years, my husband had been systematically siphoning money from our joint accounts and the rental income into an account that existed only in his name, opened at a credit union across town. A credit union neither of us had ever used together. He had deposited cash from the rental properties before it ever hit our joint account. He had taken the $60,000 from the refinance and moved it into this account in increments designed to avoid the $10,000 reporting threshold. The total they were able to document was just over $112,000. Richard said, "He was planning this. This isn't impulsive. He's been preparing to leave for years." That sentence hit me differently than discovering the affair had. The affair hurt my heart. This told me something about the man himself, about who he had been quietly while I was teaching children to read and paying the electric bill and planting tomatoes in the backyard. It told me that the life I thought we were building together, he had been treating as something to extract from. I cried. And then I stopped crying. When he finally told me he wanted a divorce, he brought it up himself on a Tuesday evening in March, sitting at the kitchen table where I had sat 7 months earlier, with a quiet feeling I couldn't name. I looked at him for a long moment before I answered. "Okay," I said. He seemed surprised by that. I think he expected more. His attorney made contact with Richard the following week. The settlement offer they presented was, Richard told me, aggressive. He wanted the house, claiming he had managed the major financial decisions and thus had more claim to the appreciation. He wanted both rental properties, citing that he had been the primary manager of tenant relationships. He proposed splitting the retirement accounts, but with an unequal division that he justified through some accounting I won't pretend to fully understand. I would receive what amounted to about a third of what we'd actually built together. Richard laid the offer out on his desk and looked at me. I said, "What happens if I accept it?" He said, "Gloria, he hid over $100,000. He refinanced a property and pocketed the proceeds. If you accept this, you're letting him walk away from that, and you're letting him take assets built partly with money he was supposed to be sharing with you." I said, "I understand that. What happens if I accept it?" He leaned back in his chair. "Then we file a separate civil action for the fraudulent concealment. We take him to court on that separately. It's slower and more expensive, but it's still an option." "And what's the other option?" Richard set both hands on the desk. "We reject this offer entirely. We file a motion disclosing the hidden assets to the court. We request a formal division of all marital assets, including the $112,000 he concealed. We let a judge see the full picture." I thought about it for 3 days. Then I called Richard and told him I wanted to do something different from either option. I wanted to accept the settlement. I wanted to sign exactly what they had offered. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Walk me through your thinking." So I did. Here is what I had understood, sitting with those documents for months, that my husband had not. The $60,000 from the Elmwood refinance had not disappeared. I had found it. It was sitting in that credit union account. But the loan itself, the $60,000 he had pulled out, was still attached to the property. If he took the Elmwood rental, he was taking the debt too. The property was worth $140,000. The remaining mortgage on it was $93,000. The $60,000 line from the refinance was a separate liability that, depending on how it was categorized legally, was either attached to the property or to him personally. Richard's reading was that, structured correctly, it would follow him. The house, our primary residence, had increased in value significantly since we bought it, but it also had deferred maintenance I had documented quietly over the past year. The furnace, the roof, the foundation drainage on the east side, not emergencies, but not nothing. His attorney had valued the house based on comparable sales. They had not had it inspected. The retirement accounts he was getting the larger share of were invested in funds that Richard's financial consultant described as concentrated and volatile. My smaller share was in more diversified funds. Over a 10-year horizon, and at 68 I had to think about 10-year horizons, the risk profile was considerably different. None of this guaranteed anything. I want to be clear about that. I'm not going to tell you I had a perfect plan that worked out perfectly. What I had was information, and I had spent my whole life knowing that the right information, understood fully, is worth more than most things. Richard filed one motion before I signed. He filed it quietly, and it wasn't about the settlement. It was a disclosure to the IRS of the structured deposits my husband had made to avoid the reporting threshold. That practice has a name. It's called structuring, and it's a federal offense regardless of whether the money itself is legal. Richard said he had an obligation to document it correctly. He said the IRS might do nothing. He said they also might not. Then I signed the settlement agreement. I want to tell you what the day I signed felt like, because I think people expect it to feel like surrender. It didn't. It felt like setting something down that I had been carrying for a very long time, and finally choosing to put it on someone else's ground. My husband's attorney shook my hand. My husband did not meet my eyes. 3 weeks later, I was living in a 2-bedroom apartment on the north side of Dayton. My daughter helped me paint the living room a color called soft sage that I had liked in a magazine and never thought I'd actually put on a wall. My son flew in from Seattle for a weekend, and we walked along the river and had lunch, and he told me he was proud of me, and I cried a little, and he pretended not to notice. I had my separate account, the rainy day fund, the $42,000 my mother had taught me to keep. I had my teaching pension, which came to me directly and had never been in his control. I had my Social Security. I had the retirement accounts from the settlement, smaller than they should have been, but stable. I was not comfortable the way we had been comfortable together. but I was not destitute, and I was not afraid. My husband moved in with her. The woman named Amber, who was 34 years old, he moved into the house on Elmwood, the rental property, his choice, I think, because he believed it was his best asset. The furnace on the primary house went out in November. He called a contractor about the roof in January. The foundation drainage issue caused water in the basement during a heavy rain in February. I know these things because my former tenant on Elmwood, a woman who had rented from us for 6 years and who I had always treated fairly and who felt no particular loyalty to my ex-husband, sent me a few text messages that year out of what I think was simple human decency. She told me he raised the rent on the house significantly when her lease renewed. She told me Amber didn't seem to like Ohio. She told me that by spring it was clear Amber had left. The IRS letter arrived, not to me, but I know it arrived, because Richard told me it did. The inquiry took about 14 months total. The outcome is not mine to detail publicly, and honestly, I don't know all the details. What I know is that he was required to repay taxes, penalties, and interest on money he had reported incorrectly, and that the amount was significant. I know because my son, who had maintained a limited relationship with his father, mentioned it once in passing, and then didn't bring it up again. I want to stop here and say something directly to anyone listening who is in a situation that feels anything like mine, because this is the thing I most wanted someone to say to me in that first year. You do not have to be young to start over. I know that sounds obvious, but when you have spent 41 years building a life that is inseparable from another person, when your grocery habits and your sleep schedule and your sense of home itself are all woven around someone else, the idea of starting over doesn't feel like freedom at first. It feels like being handed a blank page when you are exhausted and didn't ask for one. What I want to tell you is that the page is yours. I planted a container garden on my apartment balcony that first summer. 5 tomato plants and a pot of basil. It was not my backyard garden with the raised beds and the raspberry canes I tended for 15 years, but those tomatoes were the best I can remember eating. Maybe because I'd grown them in 15 square feet of borrowed sunlight and they had no reason to be as good as they were. My mother used to say, "Keep something in your own name." She meant money. But I've come to think she meant more than that. Keep something that is yours. Know what it's worth. Don't let anyone tell you you're too old to understand the papers they put in front of you. Don't sign anything you haven't read. And if someone you love asks you to trust them with things you've built together, that trust should have a flaw, a minimum of transparency you require simply because you are a person and you deserve to know. I didn't know everything I should have known, but when it mattered, I learned fast. And I had people who helped me. My daughter, a good attorney, a forensic accountant who looked at 5 years of documents and told me exactly what she saw. Nobody did it for me, but they stood beside me while I did it myself. I'm 69 now. I've been in this apartment for just over a year. I joined a book club in my new neighborhood. We meet at a coffee shop on the 2nd and 4th Wednesdays of the month. I've made 2 friends there that I think will last. Last month one of them asked me, on the walk back to our cars, if I was happy. I thought about it seriously, the way I've learned to think about things seriously. I am, I said. Not every day, but on balance. She nodded, like she understood exactly what I meant. My daughter calls on Sunday mornings. My son sends me articles he thinks I'll find interesting, which is its own kind of love. I teach a reading enrichment class at the public library on Friday afternoons, volunteer work, nothing formal, just me and a handful of kids who need a little extra help with phonics. It is the best 2 hours of my week without question. The man I was married to for 41 years is still in Dayton as far as I know. We have not spoken. I don't think we will. I don't wish him harm. I don't wish him much of anything, which I have come to understand is its own kind of peace. Not forgiveness exactly, not bitterness, just the quiet on the other side of caring deeply about what someone thinks of you. He thought, sitting across that conference table, that I didn't understand what I was signing. He was wrong. I understood exactly what I was signing. I was signing myself back, taking the thing he thought he was taking from me, and stepping entirely out of the architecture of a life that had been built, it turned out, on a foundation only one of us knew was cracked. He got the house on Elmwood. He got the debt. He got the roof and the furnace and the IRS and 34-year-old Amber, who stayed for 8 months. I got the soft sage walls and the tomatoes and the Sunday phone calls and the Friday afternoons with the children. I got the page. I'm still writing on it. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in any grand or philosophical way, just the plain, practical kind. The kind a third-grade teacher thinks about when she's grading a worksheet. You make a choice, and the choice makes something else happen, and that something else makes another thing happen after that. It goes all the way down, further than most of us bother to trace. My husband made his choices quietly, over years. He chose to move money when he thought I wasn't looking. He chose to plan an exit while sitting beside me at our kitchen table. He chose to believe that 41 years of watching me manage the household books meant I didn't understand what a balance sheet was. Every one of those choices was his own, and every one of them led, without exception, to exactly where he ended up, sitting in a rental property with a crumbling furnace and an IRS inquiry and a 34-year-old who didn't stay. I don't think the world is designed to punish dishonesty. I've lived long enough to see dishonest people do just fine. But I do think that the habits of a dishonest life tend to carry their own costs, not as punishment, but as consequence. When you build something on concealment, you have to keep concealing. When you take more than your share, you eventually have to defend the taking. That takes energy. It takes constant maintenance, and it makes you careless in other places because you can only watch so many things at once. My husband watched the wrong things. He watched the accounts. He didn't watch the documents. He didn't watch the property records, or the loan terms, or the fact that the woman he was married to had been keeping detailed household files for 30 years and knew, when prompted, how to read what was in them. What I want to say to anyone who feels like I felt in those first months, bewildered, behind, like the other person had years of head start on you, is this: it is almost never as late as it feels. Information is not the same as time. You can learn fast when you have to. I was 67 years old, sitting in an attorney's office for the first time in my life, learning what forensic accounting meant. I wasn't fast. I wasn't confident, but I was willing to understand, and that willingness turned out to be the only thing that mattered. Integrity is not just about telling the truth to other people. It's about being honest with yourself, about what you know and what you don't, about what you signed and what you should have read, about the moments you trusted when you should have verified. I had my own failures in that marriage. I signed things without reading them. I let him manage what I didn't want to think about. That was my part, and I sat with it honestly. But I didn't quit when it got hard to understand. I asked questions. I found people who knew more than I did, and I listened to them. I kept going back to the documents until they made sense. That is its own kind of courage, not the dramatic kind, but the steady, unglamorous kind that looks like sitting at a dining room table with a stack of tax returns until 11 at night. Gloria sat across from a man who thought he had already won. She picked up the pen anyway, not out of defeat, out of understanding. That's the whole story, really. The rest was just consequence.